Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is a groundbreaking series that dives into the lives of people living in the last frontier. Each episode introduces you to colorful characters from around the state. Funding for Indie Alaska is provided in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. Catch the latest episodes at alaskapublic.org.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday and happy Veterans Day, everyone. Thank you to all of those who continue to serve and who have served, especially those in the National Weather Service today. We thank you for your continued service as civil servants to our nation. As it is the 11th of November, we welcome you back to Alaska Weather. As always, you can get your latest weather information from all of our servants at weather.gov/Alaska. The weather info line is at 800-472-0391, and we serve information to you on social media as well, NWS Alaska, on Twitter, on Facebook, using the hashtag AKwx. You can find out plenty of information, a cornucopia, let's say, across southeastern Alaska, including wind and snow and wave information. It's all there today from NWS Juneau. Make sure you check that out. And cold temperature reports as well from NWS Fairbanks. YouTube, you can go to NWS Alaska and NWS Anchorage for the full look at your surface maps before we get into Alaska weather. That's posted around 4 o'clock every afternoon. Here's a review of what's been going on. We'll get into what is happening and coming your way here in just a moment. Hurricane force winds and seas have been seen in Alaska. Buoy 46075 there, south and west of the Shumagins and south of False Pass and the Alaska Peninsula this morning reported wave heights pretty close to 44 feet and gusts that were over 60 knots, which is just about 70 miles per hour. That coincided with the barometric pressure dropping to about 975, which is about 28.80 on your mercurial thermometer there, showing inches of mercury there. If you still have mercury in your thermometer, you got to be extra careful with it now, of course. That's a hazmat situation. But this right here was a pretty impressive buoy report. We also had peak wind gusts today around 93 miles per hour out around Akitan, and some damage around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. It sounds like Connex containers were blown around or blown over. Sounds like there's a roof damage and window damage and car damage out there. And so again, be extra careful there if you're cleaning things up, but it sounds like conditions should be improving for the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula as we go through the rest of the night. There is still a high wind warning out for the Alaska Peninsula. You can see that shaded here in red. Gusts there could reach upwards of 60 to 80 miles per hour, but a lot of that really tough stuff should be diminishing as we go ahead into the next couple hours there. So improving conditions slowly and surely through the evening if you're in the Alaska Peninsula. The places that will be the windiest, though, will be those northwest-oriented gaps there. So as the wind is flowing through this way, if it gets channeled in those tight spots and you know where you are, that's going to be the tough spots there, so be careful there. Now, as you look out in southeastern Alaska, the red shaded areas here are two things. Up north, that's winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings, I should say, for areas around Yakutat, or excuse me, not Yakutat, Haines and the Lynn Canal region, as well as the Klondike Highway and the Thai Inlet. Those areas. So winter storm warning for as much as 9 to 12 inches of snow, and that's going to continue into about midday Thursday, it looks like. Further south, it's a wind issue, and that is high wind warnings for areas around the southern coast, as well as the Dixon entrance and some of these southern intercoastal areas. Looking for gusts that could reach upwards of 40 miles sustained from the south and east, and then gusting upwards of 60 miles per hour. So you're going to see some wind across some of the southern channels there and the outer coast as well, not to mention higher seas, and a chance for thunderstorms. We'll talk about that in a bit. And the yellow shaded area here is for snow as well. That's a winter weather advisory for Hyder. Hyder could be looking at about 8 inches of snow in the next 24 hours or so. So you're looking at some snow opportunities, some wind for southeast, and improving conditions out across the Alaska Peninsula. Now, how much snow? You're looking at southeast map here, and the contours are snowfall predictions. This is total snowfall through the 13th, about 7 o'clock in the morning. And we're going to focus on the snow up here around the Klondike Highway and the Tye Inlet region, up around Haines and Skagway. And it's looking like we're talking about snowfall again that could be around 8 to 12 inches of snow in some of the higher terrain, a little bit lower down. I believe the snow level is going to come to about 700 to 800 feet tonight. So conditions should be cooling down. There should be snow falling in the region. Down south again around Hyder, you can see some of those higher snowfall amounts, but a lot of this again is really limited to the higher terrain, not so much across the intercoastal waterways or the outer coast at this point, mainly a higher terrain issue. So that's the southeast snow forecast there. Let's look out west and track what's coming in behind this weather maker now. This system, you can barely see it in this view, is moving across the Alaska Peninsula and into the Gulf. Behind that, there is cold air coming in quickly across the north and the northwest. Behind that, you can see a trail of moisture. It doesn't seem very organized right now. We're going to watch this system here east of Tokyo in the Sea of Japan as that tracks north and east in the wake of this current weather maker. Here's a better view of it. This is moving across the Alaska Peninsula. Look at this part right here. You can see the curling in of the west and northern side flowing into the vacuum that was around 975 millibars earlier today. Those stronger northwest winds, that's what moved through on Alaska and Dutch Harbor today, and over Akutan and over Sand Point and the Shumagon Islands and over the buoy we were just talking about. And all this is organizing and going to be a vacuum across the northern parts of the Gulf, really pulling in that southeast wind across southern parts of southeast and working with the cold air to generate a lot of snow and moving over the Haines and Klondike Highway. So a really impressive movement of air across southeastern Alaska. And it'll do the same thing across south central, but not in such a way that it's going to cause a whole lot of disruption, that looks like. But it will help to clear the sky and drag in colder air from the north. And this is going to be the effect that most of Alaska sees, especially continental Alaska, really gets in on the cold air as this draws in the cold from the north and the northwest. So a big shift in the weather pattern thanks to this singular storm here. But it's also going to have help. Behind that, there's another wave of low pressure coming in here. So each one of these waves that works its way across the state is successively bringing in more and more cold and pushing that weather and that colder weather further and further south. So a really impressive system here. You can see the moisture already building up ahead of that weather maker, the low pressure system working out into the western Gulf this evening. Once again, here's a look at the satellite picture. I'll step out of the way. You can see that moisture moving towards southeast. We're also going to watch this region here for showers and thunderstorms as we get ahead into tonight and tomorrow. For anywhere on the outer coast of southeast, there's a chance for marine thunderstorms as we get into the daytime tomorrow. So at present, we're looking at about a 963 millibar low, that low pressure system moving out over the Shumagons and into the western Gulf with high pressure across the Yukon. Pretty dry conditions across the interior. There was some pretty significant cold this morning as well. Fairbanks, it looked like, was really starting to get into winter mode with temperatures below zero earlier today. Showers and thunderstorms will become rain and thunderstorms closer to the coastline tonight, with pockets of snow for the higher terrain, including the Klondike Highway, and probably a much better chance for rainfall across the lower terrain. Snow showers will continue across southwestern Alaska, especially the coast, and just windy conditions there with periods of rain and snow for the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, snow showers on and off across most of the Bering, especially the Bering Sea coast, and a frontal boundary trying to sneak in across the north slope. Most of that's going to be pretty weak, and you'll see more fog and flurries with that than anything else. For the interior, drier conditions continue around Tanana and Yukon valleys. Snow showers for the Brooks Range, and it looks like continued snow showers for a large part of the Bering. Rain and snow showers closer to the peninsula, and rain and wind for most of the Gulf. A 961 millibar low for Thursday with a frontal boundary moving in. That means a very strong southeasterly gradient moving up through the inner channels. And again, as that vacuum is parked out across the northern Gulf there at 961 millibars, it's just going to dawdle and kind of wobble around here as we get into the end of the week. All the while, though, it's pulling in cold air across the north and across the Bering, keeping things unsettled across the west coast with snow showers there, rain for the central and western Aleutians, drier and more cloudy conditions across the North Slope and the Yukon Valley, a few areas of snow across the Alaska Peninsula, and high pressures trying to park across the North Slope, locking in that cold, especially north of the Brooks Range there, as we continue to see that very strong draw of southeasterly warm and wet air up through southeastern Alaska into the end of the week. So an impressive showing of Mother Nature here on Veterans Day. Temperature-wise, today 30s and 40s ahead of that weather maker. Behind it, we see teens and 20s for most of the west and south central, 27 in Anchorage, 39 in Homer, and around Montague Island, 33 for Cordova. It was 1 below by mid-afternoon around Fairbanks, 11 in Eagle, 12 in Fort Yukon, 9 below for Arctic Village. Single digits and teens for the Arctic coast. Teens and 20s for most of Kotzebue Sound. Shishmaref had 28, 21 in Nome. And as you head down toward Grayling, also 21 degrees there, 17 in McGrath, 23 in Bethel, southwestern Alaska, and Dillingham and King Salmon. Still in the 30s, King Salmon considerably warmer though. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. The Sandpoint was 45. Behind that system, 39 and still windy, 32 in St. Paul. There was a gust. If you were watching around St. George, you probably saw a gust around 109 miles per hour. And before you get out the letter to write home to mom, chances are that's not quite right. It's we've got a kind of a raised eyebrow about that 109. It doesn't quite fit the pattern we were expecting there, so we're not really sure that's right. But out across the west, we do know that temperatures in the lower to mid 30s for the central and western chain are correct as of 2 o'clock, 33 in Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures will be below zero from Arctic Village all the way to Fairbanks and then southward toward Tok and Northway. South central, south of the chain, or south of the Alaska Range, in the lower to mid 20s there. Southeast in the 30s to about 40 degrees around Craig and Klawock and Ketchikan. Across the Arctic coast, single digits there, 5 above for Barrow. Nome's looking at about 14 southwest in the low to mid 20s. The Alaska Peninsula, still breezy, still blustery, but still above zero. And certainly above freezing too. 36 around Sandpoint, 34 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, up to 34 for St. Paul tomorrow. 5 in Fairbanks, 7 in Barrow, low 20s for Nome, and about the same there around Bethel today. Tomorrow, 23 degrees. Southeast, you're looking at low to mid 40s, even milder around Ketchikan and Annette. South central in the 20s and 30s with Kodiak nosing up on 40 degrees for your Thursday. Flying weather is going to be tough in southeast tomorrow. Not just visibility will be a problem, but of course turbulence and probably some icing, not to mention the chance for some thunderstorms there. So be extra careful in southeast tomorrow. Across the west, conditions are improving. Across the peninsula, conditions are improving. We're still going to watch for IFR in the north and across the western coast with MVFR developing across the western Alaska Range. AKwx Pass expected to turn over toward IFR conditions. Same goes for Adigan Pass during the daytime tomorrow. You'll start at MVFR. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expect developing areas of MVFR through the day. Same goes for Rainy Pass and Windy Pass. Expect MVFR to develop there. Isabel Pass probably looking for VFR. Mentasta Pass right now looks cold and dry in VFR. Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions mainly in the morning, and Portage Pass we expect to see some improvements during the day, heading for VFR by the day's end. Chilkoot and White Pass planned for snow and at least MVFR with that winter storm warning in place. Tomorrow's freezing levels, well, most of the state is going sub-freezing, it looks like, from areas just south of King Salmon and northward into northern parts of southeastern Alaska. That warm air aloft retreating back to the contiguous 48 states. Icing potentials there, and with all the moisture and all the lift we have here and colder air setting in, not a surprise to see areas down south above 4,000 feet could run into some significant icing potential to above 5,000 feet a little bit further north, where there's still a pocket of warm air hanging out. And then north of the Brooks Range below 9,000 feet, probably some isolated moderate there, and across the west below 4,000 feet from the Bering Strait over Nunivak Island to the Pribilofs to just about Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Here's the jet stream. If you had to show one map today to talk about what is going on with our weather, this would be it. And this is the main jet all the way across the North Pacific, screaming in from the west at 140 to 150 knots. There's probably some faster winds just south of this region here. The main core of the jet now has opened the door to the Arctic, and cold air is moving in quickly. Below that, we have low pressure across the northern Gulf, and that northwesterly flow is working across the YK Delta and the chain, and about 25 to as high as 50 knots. More of a lighter northerly flow coming ashore in the North Slope, and the winds pick up after they move into the Gulf at around 30 knots from the north. Across the eastern Gulf, 60 to 70 knot winds here at 9,000 feet coming into southeastern Alaska. A very similar pattern at 3,000 feet. Winds also moving in quickly to southeast at 50 to 70 knots. Thus the issue with turbulence, and thus the issue with cold air across the west. Again, light winds predominantly across the interior and over the Brooks Range in northwest around 10 to as high as 20 knots. So turbulence, let's focus on southeast below 6,000 feet. Not only will it be cold, wet, and windy and stormy in some cases, but it's going to be pretty choppy there. Look for pockets of isolated severe tomorrow, especially below 6,000 feet. Across the northern Gulf, we're going to have occasional moderate around the northern sections of the Gulf along the coast and into Prince William Sound. The Cook Inlet side, watch for developing areas of occasional moderate across the Cook Inlet region, and we're still going to have some trouble across places like Kodiak Island and on the lee side of the Alaska Peninsula below 6,000 feet. Things start to improve across the west and across southwestern Alaska below 4,000 feet for the daytime tomorrow. That's a look at Thursday in aviation land, and it's going to be a rough day across south central and southeast because of the wind. We'll talk about the marine weather here in just a few minutes, so stay with us.
Become familiar with the correct use and adjustment of your lap belt and shoulder harness. Adjust the lap belt so that it rests snugly across your hips, and then adjust your shoulder harness so that it is also snug. But make sure that the shoulder harness does not lift the lap belt from its proper position. If a single shoulder harness is used, it should extend across the torso for maximum effectiveness. In the case of emergency, the proper position for all occupants in the helicopter is the full upright position against the seat back. You should also become familiar with the aircraft intercom systems, or ICS, for use during flight. You will need to note the location of the fire extinguisher, the ELT, or emergency locator transmitter, the first aid kit, and extra survival gear. The location of these items will vary with different helicopter makes, as will the seatbelt mechanisms and door latches. Always get a thorough safety briefing for the type of aircraft that you are flying in. And if there is anything that you are unfamiliar with, please ask the helicopter manager before continuing your project or flight. During flight, the pilot is in charge of the aircraft and will give any instructions that you might need in case of an emergency. During the flight, you will be able to speak to the pilot or other passengers over the intercom system. But when the pilot or helicopter manager are making radio calls or during takeoff and landing, passengers should refrain from using the intercom system. Always make sure that all your personal items are secure in the cabin and clear from the controls and instrument panel. Also watch for any flight hazards, such as other aircraft, birds, or ground hazards while in flight. Never assume that a hazard has been seen by the pilot. It is the job of the pilot and helicopter manager to determine the suitability of a landing site. However, you will probably take an active role in selecting areas and preparing landing sites. These off-site landing areas pose one of the greatest risks in helicopter operations due to the variable hazards involved. There are 4 factors involved in selecting a landing area. The first consideration is the size of the landing zone. Make sure that the landing zone and touchdown area are adequate for the model of helicopter you're using. Second, the landing area needs to be level with a clear approach and departure path. This path should allow passengers to board and depart the helicopter on the downhill slope in full view of the pilot. The third factor is the helicopter approach and departure path. There needs to be adequate clearance from obstacles for the helicopter to make a normal approach and departure from the landing zone while considering expected winds. The fourth factor is wind direction. The helicopter approach and landing should be into the wind. It's a good idea to tie pieces of flagging to small trees or shrubs near the landing area. This will give an indication of wind direction to the pilot on approach. You can also give a radio call to the crew with this information and let the pilot know if there are gusty or erratic winds. Remember to stand at the upwind side of the landing area with your back to the wind as a final reference for the pilot. Most off-site landing areas need some improvements to eliminate obstructions. The helicopter manager is trained to use chainsaws and can clear unimproved areas to meet agency guidelines. It's a good idea to keep the forest helicopter specialist and managers informed about future work sites that may need landing area improvements. Sites needing only minimal work can be improved by crews using hand tools. Special operations cover a wide variety of missions. Your involvement with the planning and performance of the job are very important. The helicopter manager will let you know what duties you will perform. It is important to remember in sling operations that only qualified aviation personnel will attach and unhook loads. For your own safety, plan for the unexpected. If bad weather comes in suddenly, you may have to choose an alternate pickup site. In this case, you may have to improve the site and guide the aircraft to your location. You can help the aircrew find your location by using your radio and giving your position in relation to the helicopter. You can do this by simply using the 12-hour clock technique. In this example, you would tell the pilot that you are at 9 o'clock. And wearing the highly visible orange flight suit will also help the aircrew find you easily. Your forest helicopter staff is making every effort to provide you with the safest and most efficient resource to help you meet your transportation needs. You can help us by becoming an active participant in the Region Aviation Safety Program. You can work with air crews in the planning process and provide options to allow for changing weather conditions. Have a plan for alternate projects so that bad weather won't spoil your day. By taking responsibility for your own safety and survival needs, your efforts will prevent incidents and prepare you for the unexpected.
Kept watching for Tom Selleck there. I just never saw him. Here's a look at the southwesterly flow that's strengthening tonight and into tomorrow for the coastal areas. Don't forget there are storm warnings out tonight for most of the Gulf regions, especially for southeast. And we're going to see some stronger gusts, probably upwards to about 55 knots or so for many areas along the coast with that southwesterly flow. Seas in the lower 30 range there, 30 feet outside of Gustavus and Cross Sound. 31 feet the further south you go toward Dixon Entrance. And don't forget about the chance for thunderstorms again tomorrow. Southerlies also strengthening across the southern intercoastal waterways with seas there only around 5 to 6 feet, but that's plenty. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal diminished to 15 knots tomorrow. We're still going to have strong winds across the outer coast. Those are improving for Friday, and there's still a chance for thunderstorms. Watch for those gusts to diminish to about 50 knots, but still some powerful stuff there as low pressure continues to linger in the northern and eastern Gulf through the weekend, so we're not done just yet. Across south central, northerlies coming down Cook Inlet, 25 to 30 knots, much stronger across the Barren Islands with seas from 14 to 16 feet there, up to 21 feet east of Kodiak Island with a 40-knot wind. Northerlies coming through Prince William Sound at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea, not so pretty inside or outside, with northeasterlies at 20-foot seas there. And again, there's going to be some higher gusts in the region. As we go through Friday, low pressure's parked right about here. We're still going to have a pretty good draw across the Barrens and across the southern tip of the Kenai. 15 to 20 knots inside of Cook Inlet, a west and northwesterly flow crossing Kodiak Island at 30 to 40 knots, 13-foot seas on the eastern side, 11-foot seas in the northern Gulf, 3-foot seas, and improving conditions inside of Prince William Sound for the weekend. Northwesterlies improving across the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow with higher gusts from Castle Cape to Chignik, of course. Look for 30-foot seas there, 20-foot seas down the coast, still holding on to 45-knot winds on the lee side of the peninsula. That improves as we head into Friday. 30 to 40 knots with 30 knots on the Bering Sea coast, 8 to 12-foot seas expected there. Inside of Bristol Bay, you're looking at 30 knots from the north and west. Similar conditions heading into the central and eastern chain with 13-foot seas there south of Unalaska and Nikolsky, much better than today, and westerlies from Kiska to Attu at 20 to 25 knots with an 8 to 10-foot sea. For Friday, conditions about the same there as we get into the end of the week. Look for 12 to 13-foot seas for the central and eastern chain on the Bering Sea coast side, 11 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side, and 35-knot winds there from Kiska to Attu on Friday. Across the west coast, 25 knots, just about all areas there. Looking for 8 to 11-foot seas with freezing spray developing across many areas. St. Paul and St. George will be some of those regions with an 11-foot sea there on Thursday. You'll notice a little bit more of a westerly shift there north of Nunivak Island for Friday, 20 to 25 knots, 30 knots. Outside of Kuskokwim Bay with a 9-foot sea there, and again freezing spray, an issue developing across the Bering for the end of the week. For the Beaufort Seacoast, northerlies crossing the ice at 10 to 15 knots on a northeasterly flow. For the Chukchi with 15 knots with a 3 to 5-foot sea coming down the coast into the Kotzebue Sound region, 20 knots with a 6-foot sea becoming about 15 knots north and east of Cape Lisburne, and north and westerlies for the Beaufort Seacoast at 10 to 15 knots on Friday. Again, freezing spray over the open areas of water. That's a look at your marine forecast. Once again, winter storm warnings for the Haynesboro and the Klondike Highway region, the Taya Inlet, looking for 9 to 12 inches of snow there as the next weather system comes in. High wind warnings for the Dixon entrance area in the southern intercoastal waterways. Could see gusts upwards of 60 miles per hour with that. Looking for a chance for thunderstorms across the outer coast as well, with strong and gusty winds and a winter weather advisory for Hyder. Expecting 8 to 9 inches of snow there. We're not done with high winds across the Alaska Peninsula, but you should see improving conditions as we go through the evening. Gusts there could still be upwards of 85 miles per hour, especially in those northwest-oriented gaps, but conditions will improve quickly this evening and overnight as low pressure continues to sit in the northern Gulf. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.